Oh, hello. It's so good to see you again. Oh, Molly MacGregor here. I'm a storyteller from Once Upon a Time, and I've come today to tell you some stories. I come to you because of the fairy magic. You see, we don't have computers in Once Upon a Time, and so I had to call upon the fairy folk to get me here inside your computer. And I see that it worked. I'm so glad. Well, the first story that I'm going to tell you today comes from Cuba. It's in a far corner of Once Upon a Time across a great ocean. And in Cuba, una vez había una familia de ratones. Once upon a time, there was a family of mice. I know, ratones sounds like it should mean rat, but it means mice. There was a mama raton, mama mouse. There was a papa raton, papa mouse. There was an hermano raton, brother mouse, and hermana raton, sister mouse. And one day, Mama decided that they should all go on a picnic. And so she packed a great picnic lunch, and they went out into a vast meadow. They spread out a blanket, and they sat down, and they feasted, and oh, it was delicious. Papa had eaten too much, and all he wanted was a nap. And Mama was cleaning up, and Hermano got a great idea. And he said, Mama, vamos a jugar, which means, Mom, we want to go out and play. And she said, okay, which means, okay. But beware, do not go to the fence, for beyond the fence lies El Gato, the cat. And off they went. Well, you know, as soon as Mama says you must not do a thing, what must you do? You must do it. And so Hermano and Hermana went straight to the fence. And beyond the fence lay El Gato. He was asleep. His tail was flapping the grass while he was asleep. And so Hermano decided he wanted to get the cat's attention, and he went, Hola, El Gato. Nothing. And Hermano followed suit. Hola, El Gato. El Gato didn't hear them. They got brave. Hola, El Gato. Hola, El Gato. The cat didn't move. Hermano said, Hola, El Gato Flaco. Hola, El Gato Flaco. Hello, skinny cat. Well, El Gato didn't like that, and he rolled over and looked at Hermano and Hermana with his ears slanted back. You know, cats do that when they're mad. And he stared. Hermano got really, really brave and said, Hola, El Gato Flaco y Stupido. Hola, El Gato Flaco y Stupido. And then El Gato was really mad, and he leaned back on his hind paws and went leaping towards the fence, and he fell right into one of the slats, and oh, Hermano and Hermana thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Oh, El Gato, Stupido. El Gato didn't think it was funny. El Gato backed up, and he leaned back on his hind paws to get a running start, and he ran towards the fence and leaped right over the fence in front of Hermano and Hermana, and he went, Hermano and Hermano started running back to Mama and Papa. They saw Papa first. He had gotten up from his nap. They went to hide behind Papa, but Papa went straight towards Mama, and he hid behind Mama. Hermano hid behind Papa. Hermana hid behind Hermano, and El Gato was coming faster and faster and faster, and he stopped right in front of Mama and went, Mama pulled herself up to her full mouse height and said, ruff, 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 ruff. El Gato started looking around for the dog, and when El Gato didn't see the dog, he ran back towards the fence. And Mama turned around to face her family, and she said, that is why you need to learn another language. I didn't know dog was another language. Did you? Well, now we're going to go to Ethiopia. Oh, it's in a different far corner of Once Upon a Time. It's in a place called Africa. Yeah, well, stories travel. You see, when people travel, their stories travel too. And I heard this story from a traveler from Ethiopia. And it goes like this. There was a boy named Miobi. And Miobi and his family lived in a village not far from the jungle. They have jungles in Ethiopia and Africa. And Miobi was a scaredy cat. He was afraid of his own shadow. Do you know a scaredy cat? I bet you do. They're everywhere. Sometimes I'm even afraid. Well, Miobi was afraid of everything. You see, because once when he was young, his pet mongoose got out and went straight into the jungle and landed in a pile of quicksand. Miobi followed after him, and he was so afraid he didn't want to lie down and try to pull the mongoose out of the quicksand, and so he watched the mongoose just sink into the quicksand and die. And after that, Miobi was afraid of absolutely everything. Well, in Miobi's village, there comes a time in every boy's life where he must prove himself to become a man. And Miobi's father was a bit afraid this would never happen. He sat Miobi down one day and he said, son, you got to find your courage. Otherwise, you'll never be a man, and we'll never see you as a man. You got to find your courage. And Miobi didn't quite know what that meant, and so his pa said, well, it means you must do something you're afraid to do. What might that be? Well, I'm afraid to go into the jungle. Well, that's what you must do. So they packed some provisions for Miobi, and he had a small knife with him. And so Miobi started to go into the jungle, and he was so afraid. You see, he had his head down because he didn't want to see all the danger. But in the jungle, there are large snakes, and they went slithering across the path, and then they'd go up a tree. And when they went up the tree, Miobi could barely see them because their colors seemed to change. Miobi was so scared, so he went as fast as he could with his head down, stepping over what he thought might be a snake, and lo and behold, he found himself on the other side of the jungle. And there was a village just like his, except there were no people around. There were no people out and about. It seemed like the village was deserted, and so Miobi started looking for all the people that might be in the village. He found a cave and went inside, and don't you know, he found all the people of the village. They were hiding in a cave. Miobi went in and said, why are you hiding in here? The chieftain came up and said, there is a monster at the top of our mountain. It has the body of a hippopotamus. It has the head of a dragon. It has wings, and it breathes fire. It's got the neck of a giraffe and the tail of an elephant. It's as large as 3 Chinese barges. 3. A Chinese barge is a cargo ship. It carries stuff from one port to another to deliver its stuff to people who might need it. So the monster was as large as 3 Chinese barges, large ocean vessels. The chieftain went on to explain that every time the monster found his supper and decided to roast it, he would hold whatever it was out in his claws and breathe fire on it. And then the fire would go down the mountain and burn everything in its path. It's why its village looked like there'd been a fire there. It was so sad, and the people were so afraid. The chieftain went on to say, so we need someone to go kill the monster. And without thinking, Miobi said, I'll do it. Well, this is Miobi. But Miobi knew he had to find his courage, so he volunteered. The chieftain was surprised, and everybody in the village wished him well as he went up the mountain. Miobi went up the mountain, and it wasn't long before he could actually see the monster. It had the body of a hippopotamus, the tail of an elephant, the neck of a giraffe, the head of the dragon, and it was breathing fire because it was holding a baby elephant it was roasting for dinner. Miobi got scared, but he kept on going, and then the fire started down the mountain, and it was going to singe the hair on Miobi's arm. Miobi turned and ran way back down to the bottom of the mountain. When he looked up, the monster had grown. The monster wasn't as big as 3 Chinese barges. It was as big as 5 Chinese barges. How did he get so big? Miobi didn't know, but he knew if he didn't go up soon, he would lose whatever courage he had found thus far. Miobi took a deep breath, and he looked down at the ground so he wouldn't be afraid. When he looked up, and he went all the way up to the top of the mountain, and when he got there, he looked around. And he didn't see the monster. He was looking all over for it. He looked around and down and up, and he didn't find it. And then he felt something against his ankle. He leaned down and looked, and it was a small monster with the body of a hippo, the tail of an elephant, the neck of a giraffe, the head of a dragon. And when it tried to speak, it just sneezed and went with a puff of smoke. Miobi leaned down and picked it up and cradled it like it was his pet mongoose. They were about the same size. He didn't look so scary. He was too tiny to be scary, and so Miobi put him up on his shoulder and proceeded to walk down the mountain. And don't you know, with every step, Miobi got a little bit taller, and his chest puffed out just a little bit more, and by the time he was down the mountain, he was walking with the confidence of a man. He went straight to the cave, and everyone in the cave went, "Ah!" They didn't expect Miobi to return alive. They all came forward to see what he had on his shoulder, and the chieftain was there first, looking down. Miobi looked up and said, "Here is your monster. Here is your monster. It doesn't seem so frightening after all, does it?" The chieftain had a little girl who wanted a closer look, and so the chieftain picked her up so she could see, and she reached out and petted the mongoose on Miobi's shoulder, and she looked at it with so much tenderness and said, "What is your name?" And the monster said, "My name is Fear." Well, Miobi was declared a hero, and there was a great celebration with lots of feasting and storytelling. You see, Miobi had to tell the story again and again. And at the end of the day, Miobi decided to make his way home through the jungle. Now, some people say that Miobi became a legend in his own time that day. Miobi's father will tell you that that was the day Miobi became a man. But Miobi will tell you that he is simply So grateful not to be afraid anymore. It's one of my favorite stories. And now we're going to go over to another corner of Once Upon a Time called the Philippines. It is across a great ocean, and it's farther than Cuba. It is, but it's a sweet story. It's one of my favorites. And it's about a young couple named Keita and Pecto. They lived in the Philippines in a barrio, which is, well, in my neck of Once Upon a Time, we would call it a village. And you might call it something like a neighborhood. They lived in a barrio where all the poor people lived. Well, Keita and Pecto were good people, but they had no skill. They had no way to make a living. They didn't know how to do much of anything except love each other. And so one day, Keita said, Pecto, why don't we open a store? That way the people in the barrio can get everything they need from us, and we can make our living that way. And don't you know, that's what they did. And when they got ready to open the store, they were so excited. They had curtained off part of their hut for them to live in, and they had made the front part into a store, and they had rice and sugar and a spot of tea, things people would need. And so on their first day, they opened the door and waited. At the end of the day, they closed the door, and not a single person had come in. But they were not discouraged. It was only the first day. And so the next day, they opened their store with great anticipation. And at the end of the day, they closed the door, and not a single person had come in. They were getting desperate. It went on like this for the whole first week, and they had earned but a few centavos. I would call them coppers. You might call them pennies. And there were but a few coppers that Keita had in her hand, and she said, Pecto, we cannot live on this. It is not enough. What are we to do? And Pecto shrugged his shoulders and said, not to give up. Well, the next day they opened the door for business, and there were 3 beautiful ladies waiting to come in. Oh, they were magnificent. They sort of floated into the store like they were not quite touching the ground. And they went straight to the counter where Keita was standing. Pecto was in the back doing something. And the beautiful lady said, we would like to buy these 3 clay pipes. It was the only luxury Keita had in the store. They were white pipes made of clay, and they were beautiful, just beautiful. The beautiful lady said, how much do you want? Keita said, 10 centavos. She was afraid it might be too much and that they might want a bargain. But no, the beautiful lady reached into her pocket and pulled out a 10 centavo piece. It was a bit strange, for it had nicks in the edges. It wasn't smooth. But the beautiful lady took it and put it in Keita's hand and folded her fingers over it like it was precious. They took the 3 clay pipes and thanked Keita for her help, and off they went. Now they had chatted a bit, and Pecto came out and said, who are you talking to? And Keita said, oh, there were 3 beautiful ladies here. They had bought the 3 clay pipes on the counter, and there were 3 clay pipes on the counter. Pecto shrugged his shoulders and waved her away like she was crazy or something. But Keita looked at her hand, and she had a 10 centavo piece. So she took the 10 centavo piece and put it in her special box where she put her special things. She had her mother's combs in there and some ribbons. It went in there for safekeeping. And the next day, when Kata and Pecto opened their store, there was a line of people waiting to come in. And by the end of the day, they had sold absolutely everything that was in the store. They counted their money. They had enough to supply the store for the next day. They had enough for themselves to eat a grand supper and some left over. Kata said, "I'll take care of stocking the store for tomorrow." And then she put away the sum left over in her special box. Kata made sure that the store was fully stocked the next day. They opened the door and there was a line of people waiting to come in to buy their things. And at the end of the day, the shelves were bare. The counter was empty. They counted their money. They had some to stock the store. They had some for a fine supper and they had some left over. And they had a fine supper. Kata said, "I'll stock the store for tomorrow. You get a good night's rest. You need your sleep." She put away the sum left over in that special box. And don't you know, the next day it was the same thing. People lined up to get into the store and selling out of everything they had by the end of the day. It was a miracle. Well, Kata was getting tired of stocking the store each and every night. So one night she looked at Pecto and said, "You know, I believe we need a bigger store. That way we don't have to stock the store every single night. We can take an evening off and just rest and be together." Pecto thought it was a grand idea and he set about it right away. And he built them a much larger store. It took more effort for Kata to stock the store and make sure the shelves were full and that the counter had many, many beautiful things. And when they opened the door of their bigger store, people were lined up to come in. And at the end of the day, it was all gone. They had sold out of everything. They were thrilled because they had some to stock the store, they had some for themselves, and some left over. Each and every night, Kata put that sum left over into her special box for safekeeping. And they continued to prosper. And it was wonderful. They were having such a grand time. And one day, those three beautiful ladies came back into the store. And they came up to the counter and they said to Pecto and Kata, "We'd like to return these." And they held out the 3 clay pipes. Pecto said, "You cannot return these. They've been used. They're black as pitch on the inside. No, you can't." And then Kata waved him away. "I'll take care of this. Go." And she waved Pecto behind the curtain. Kata went and found her special box and reached inside for that 10-centavo piece the beautiful lady had given her. She found it because it had those nicked edges on it, and she found it and took it out and put it back in the hand of the beautiful lady and closed her fingers over it, just as the beautiful lady had done for her. The beautiful lady thanked her kindly and left with her friends. And when Kata looked down at the 3 clay pipes, they were good as new. There was no pitch on the inside. The inside was just as white as it could be. And Kata just looked at how they floated above the ground just a little bit. And then she knew. She knew she had been blessed by the fairy folk. That was the secret to their success. They had been blessed by the fairy folk. And don't you know, the Pecto and Kata remembered that, and they were quite generous to those who had less than they. And everyone in that barrio lived happily ever after. I love that story. I was so thrilled to find out that there are fairy folk in other parts of the world. I believe in fairies. Do you? I hope you do. I hope you believe in magic and miracles. It's a great way to live. Now we're going to go to India. It's in a far corner of Once Upon a Time. No, I never been there, but the story traveled to me, and I heard it and I loved it. It's about a grass cutter named Wali Da. Now, in my neck of the woods, we might call him a farmer and say he was making hay to feed the livestock. But in India, Wali Da just cut the grass to feed the livestock. He didn't own any livestock. Every day he would go out and cut the grass with his little sickle, and he would bundle it up and take it to market. And every day he always earned 5 coppers. He found that he only needed 4 to get everything he needed. So he wasn't sure what to do with the 5th copper. So he saved it. He had a loose plank in the floor, and he lifted it up, and he put a bag in there, and he put his coppers in there every single day. He did that for a lifetime. And at the end of the day, when he put his copper in, he would close the plank and think no more about it until the next day. Well, one day, Wali Da wanted to know just how much money he had. So he lifted up that plank and he pulled out that bag, and it was so full and so heavy, it started to tear and rip as it went across the floor. The coppers went everywhere, and Wali Da had to scoop them up so he could count them. When he counted his money, he had a small fortune, and he was dumbfounded. He didn't know what to do with all this money. He didn't need it. So he put it back in the bag that was starting to rip, and then wrapped it in a bit of blanket to make it safer, and went to the marketplace. He hid his treasure in his jacket. He didn't want robbers to know that he had money. When he got to the marketplace, he went to see his friend the goldsmith and showed him just how much money he had. And when he did, the goldsmith was dumbfounded. But the goldsmith knew what he could sell Wali Da, and went and brought out a beautiful golden bangle bracelet. Oh, it was thick and it was heavy. It was the kind of bracelet you might slip over your hand onto your wrist. Wali Da bought the bracelet, and he was so excited that he could own such a treasure. He wrapped it up carefully in the bag and hid it in his jacket. He didn't want the robbers to know he had gold. When Wali Da got home, he put the bangle on his table and fixed his supper. It was an onion and a bit of bread, a spot of tea. And then he sat down and waited for the bangle to bring him pleasure, to bring him joy. He kept looking at it. It didn't bring him pleasure, it didn't bring him joy, and after about 4 minutes it got really boring staring at the bracelet. So Wali Da wrapped it back up in that bag and the blanket, lifted up the plank and put it in there for safekeeping. He thought no more about it until his friend the merchant came to see him. He often stopped on his way from one place to another. They would share a meal, and the merchant would delight Wali Da with stories of his travels. And just as the visit was about to come to an end, Wali Da said, "Wait, I have something to show you." Wali Da lifted up that plank and pulled out the bag, showed his merchant friend the bracelet, and the merchant was dumbfounded that Wali Da would have something so valuable. Wali Da said, "I didn't want it. I didn't need it. Who do you know that might be worthy of such a gift?" Without skipping a beat, the merchant said, "Oh, it would be the princess of Kazakhstan. She is beautiful beyond compare, and her generosity of spirit is celebrated in story and in song. She would be worthy. Well, then you must take it to her and tell her that her humble servant Wali Dah wishes only to lay the best he has at her feet. Would you do it? The merchant didn't mind. It was on his way. When the merchant got to Kazakhstan, he sought audience with the princess, and when he saw her, he gave her the bracelet and said, "This is from your humble servant Wali Dah, who wishes only to lay the best he has at your feet." The princess looked at the bracelet and she was dumbfounded. Such a gift deserved a response. She didn't know what to do or say. She told the merchant to come back on the morrow, and when he did, she sent the merchant on his way with a camel loaded down with silk and brocade to say thank you to Wali Dah. She paid the merchant well, so he didn't mind returning so soon. Wali Dah was so excited to see his friend so soon, and when he realized the camel and the silks and the brocades were for him, he was dumbfounded. "I didn't need this. I didn't want this." Who do you know that might be worthy of such a gift? Without skipping a beat, the merchant said, "Oh, the Prince of Nekiba. He is wise beyond his years, and he will be a fine ruler when his day comes. He would be worthy of such a gift." "Well, then you must take it to him and tell him that his humble servant Wali Dah only wishes to lay the best he has at his feet." The merchant had already been paid handsomely for his trouble, and so he didn't mind. He went to Nekiba, sought audience with the prince, and when he saw the prince, gave him the camel of brocade and silk. And the prince was dumbfounded. It came out of nowhere for no reason. Why would anyone send him such a gift? Well, he needed to send a thank you, and so the prince sent 12 of his best horses to Wali Dah. Those horses were famed for their speed and their strength and their long life. And he paid the merchant well for his trouble, so the merchant didn't mind returning to Wali Dah so soon. When Wali Dah saw the caravan of 12 horses coming, he got all excited. He started cutting the grass. He knew those horses would be hungry. He worked and worked and worked to have enough. And then he saw his friend the merchant. And the merchant told him the horses were for him. "I don't need horses. I feed the horses. I don't have horses. I didn't want them. I didn't need them. Who do you know who would deserve such a fine gift?" And don't you know, Wali Dah and his friend had the exact same idea at the exact same moment, and so those 12 horses went to the princess of Kazakhstan. When the merchant sought audience with the princess and presented her with the 12 horses, she was dumbfounded. She didn't know what to do. She told the merchant to come back the next day for her response. The merchant returned the next day, and the princess sent Wali Dah 2 mules, each having a chest of silver strapped to his back as a way to say thank you. The merchant was dumbfounded, but the princess paid him well for his trouble, and he didn't mind going back to Wali Dah so soon. The merchant went to Wali Dah, and Wali Dah was thrilled to see his friend again so soon. But when he saw the mules and the silver were for him, he was dumbfounded. "I didn't need all this silver. I didn't want all this silver. It will attract robbers. I didn't want it. I didn't need it. Who do you know that would be worthy of such a gift? Don't you know, the merchant and his friend Wali Da had the exact same thought at the exact same moment, and so the merchant went off to Nekiba to deliver the 2 mules with the chest of silver. Wali Da paid his friend handsomely for his trouble, and so the merchant didn't mind. He went to Nekiba, presented the mules with the chest of silver to the prince, who was dumbfounded. He didn't know what to do. But he thought this foolishness had to stop, so he wanted to send a thank you that was so outrageous the foolishness would stop. So when the merchant left the prince of Nekiba, he had a caravan, 20 horses, 20 camel, and 20 elephant. 20 plus plenty plus 20 is 60 animal. The merchant was taken to Wali Da. The prince paid the merchant handsomely for his trouble, so off they went. Wali Da knew they were coming, because he felt the earth moving underneath the weight of all those animals. He got ready, he was out, he was cutting the grass as fast as he could. Oh, grass will be selling good today. I might make 6 coppers, maybe even 7. And he was cutting the grass, and then he saw his friend and realized the 20 horses, the 20 camel, and the 20 elephant were for him. And he was dumbfounded. I don't need 60 animal. I didn't want 60 animal. I cut the grass to feed the animal. I don't own animal. Don't you know? Wali Da and his friend the merchant had the exact same thought at the exact same moment, and so the merchant went with all 60 horses to the Princess of Kazakhstan. When the princess saw this outrageous gift from Wali Da, she didn't know what to do. She said, I need to go speak with me father, the Sultan. Come back tomorrow, I'll give you me response. When the princess met with her father, the Sultan, he said, Daughter, this Wali Da wants to marry you. I think he does. And I think he's trying to show you that he's wealthy enough to support you in the manner to which you are accustomed, like a princess. And I'll tell you, daughter, you could do far worse than marrying a man generous like Wali Da. We should go and see him. Well, the princess agreed, and so they went to the merchant and said that they wanted him to lead them to Wali Da. And the merchant was stuck at the castle for almost a week while they made preparation. And soon they took off. It was a great caravan. They took those 20 elephant and they put a litter on each one. It's like a carriage, and it's decorated in brocade and silk and jewels for the ladies to sit in. The 20 horses carried the men, with the Sultan in its lead. And those 20 camel, they had all the provisions necessary for the caravan on its journey to Wali Da. The merchant was feeling just awful. This had turned into such a mess. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what his fate would be, nor the fate of Wali Da. Wali Da was a humble grass cutter. He didn't know what to do. When the caravan was a day travel out from Wali Da, they stopped and they told the merchant to go tell Wali Da to make ready. They were coming to see him. The merchant flew like the wind to his friend Wali Da, told him what was about to happen, and Wali Da was dumbfounded. I cannot receive the Sultan here in me hut. Oh, no, this is a dreadful mess. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how this will end. Oh, oh, and he had a feeling in the pit of his stomach. The merchant did too. He was afraid that things would not go well with the Sultan, and when things do not go well with the Sultan, it often does not go well for that person. So Wali Dad decided the only way out of the mess was to take his own life. Wali Dad lived near a cliff that ran above the river, and Wali Dad knew if he just got to the edge of the cliff and walked off, he would crash down on the rock, and the river would take his body far, far away, and that would be the end of it. He decided that's what he was going to do. So he went to the cliff, and when he got there, he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. He could not do it because there was a hand on his shoulder that was stopping him. And the hand on his shoulder felt warm. He didn't know what was happening, so he looked around and looked up and saw the Paris from paradise. In my neck of the woods, we will call them fairy. In your neck of the woods, you might call them angels. They were beautiful. They floated high in the air. They had wings. You could sort of see through them. Wali Dad just stared, and while he was staring, the strangest thing happened to his body. It got warm all over, and an energy kind of went all around him. And right before his very eyes, his clothes transformed from dirty work clothes to fine clothes of brocade worthy of a merchant or even a prince. His little sickle with which he cut the grass turned into a great scimitar, a great sword, and the hilt, the handle, was gold and studded with jewels. Wali Dad was dumbfounded. He didn't know what to say or do when he looked up at the Paris, who said to him, Wali Dad, you are a good and generous man. Go home. All will be well. Go home. And then they disappeared. Wali Dad began to go home. It's what he was told to do. And when he got to the path, the footpath that used to lead to his hut, it was now a great road, and it was lined with trees, mature trees, leading up to a palace where his hut used to stand. He never seen such a thing. He was dumbfounded. He walked towards the palace, and when he got into the door, a manservant came and said, Oh, Wali Dad, we are so glad you have returned. The Sultan and his daughter, the princess, are on their way. We're making ready. There's a great feast in the great hall. Come inside. When the Sultan and his daughter and that caravan arrived, they were all ushered into the great hall of Wali Dad, and a great celebration took place. There was feasting and singing and storytelling for 3 days. They had a wonderful time. And at the end of the 3rd day, the Sultan asked for audience with Wali Dad so they could be alone. When they were alone, the Sultan said, Wali Dad, you are a good and generous man, and I've come to offer the hand of me daughter in marriage. What say you? Wali Dad started to stroke his beard that was grey. And he said, Oh, no, I am not the man. Your daughter is young and vibrant and deserves a husband who is young and vibrant, will give her many, many years of joy and pleasure, and will give her children. No, I am not the man, but I know of such a one. Wali Dad sent for the Prince of Nekiba, who came within a day. He met the princess, and because this is a very good fairy tale, they fell in love. Of course they did. And the wedding took place in the home of Wali Dad, and it was grand. When the wedding festivities were over, the prince and the princess made their way to Nekiba to start their life together. and the Sultan returned to Kazakhstan to rule as he always had, with fairness and generosity. And Walida, with no guess, thought the fairy magic would disappear, but it did not. And Walida was dumbfounded. And then he heard the voice of the Peri in his ear saying, Walida, you are a good and generous man. Go home. All will be well. And so it was. Walida saw that everyone he knew had more than they needed. And I promise you, they are all living happily ever after. Oh, 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 the fairy just whispered in my ear, the magic is about to run out, and so I need to say goodbye. It's been so lovely being with you today. Thank you for coming to listen to me stories. Bye for now.